The very best controller settings for Age of Empires 2 on Xbox. You're watching Console Empires. In this video, I'll be sharing the settings that I use in my games and talking about why I like or dislike each option. Some of these are of course personal preference, so I'm not saying this is the only way to play, just the way that I like to play. And why you're wrong if you play another way. Just kidding. Sort of. Alright, so first up we'll talk about the interface settings, and then I'm just going to kind of go down the list here, skipping over some less important choices and sharing some demos of the more important settings so that you can see what each option does in-game. And I'll share some controller tips and shortcuts along the way where they're relevant to each setting. PC players get a hotkey for this next option with friend or foe colors, but as far as I know, this can only be toggled in the menu for Xbox. What it does is make you always blue, your allies yellow, and the enemy red, which can be useful situationally, but I don't like it being always on. For terrain grid, I like 37% black. It's subtle enough to not look like ass, while being visible enough to be helpful. The grid makes it easier to see hills, which also helps you spot holes in your walls. It also helps with building placement and making it easier to estimate range. Advanced interface gives you access to additional features, like control groups and selection filters, both of which are hugely useful in pretty much every match. If you're new to the game, control groups let you quickly select and command user-defined sets of units, and selection filters help you sort your troops in useful ways like by health or unit type. For HUD scale, I think the default covers the screen just a little bit too much, but this is going to depend on your display and how far you sit from it. I like 89%, but I'm playing from a recliner with a wall-mounted TV, so if you're in a desk chair and using a gaming monitor, you might prefer a smaller value here. And if you make poor life decisions and hung your TV above the fireplace, well, you might need to crank this one up. Border safe is for people with older TVs where you've got an overscan issue and the game is clipping outside of your visible area. Alright, so rollover info is super helpful. This is one of my favorite settings. I don't think PC has this one, but I love it. With this on, you can see unit stats just by hovering the cursor over them, without having to click. Tooltip scale, I've got turned down to the smallest size that I can comfortably read, which for my setup is 75%. Control group icons on. Not sure why you turn this off, maybe just to clean the screen up, but it's really useful to know how many units you have at a glance, especially when you're producing into groups. I like safe delete, some players don't, up to you. Future items shows things that you'll be able to make later, which can be helpful to know what your options are going to be if you haven't memorized all 43 tech trees, or are just playing a civ you don't know as well. Global queue is helpful to understand your production at a glance. I would even expand this to another row if I could, but for small screens it might be better to go with just one. I actually turned my health bar scale down a bit while making this video. Knocking it down to around 75 felt better. The default size is kind of clunky in big fights where the health bars are blocking so much of the battle. I like playing with most of the graphics options on, but turned down a bit. A lot of players just disable everything to maximize performance, and that might be worth it if you prefer team games, as even on Series X, late game performance is not great, so you might want to disable anti-aliasing and like 3D water effects because they don't make a huge difference. The anti-aliasing, for one, is just giving your edges a little bit of a smoother, less jagged or pixelated look. The vignette is one of the ones that I find distracting, and the map lighting, I like the idea, but it's too dramatic. Arabia looks like red on my TV when this is turned on, but that's going to vary significantly based on your display and how it's set up. The Xbox has a pretty decent calibration tool built in, so if you haven't tried that out, it's worth doing both the display and HDR calibration. Bloom is similarly just too intense for me on the default, but I think 67% looks pretty good. Gamma affects the value of your midtones, and if you feel like you need to change this, I'd probably go back and calibrate your display first. For fog, I've got the animated border off, and the fog itself turned down to 70%. For audio, I actually really like the in-game music, but making videos, it's just easier to edit if the music isn't baked into the footage, and YouTube can be difficult regarding copyright, so I've just got the slider all the way off on that one. I wish that there was separate sliders for the alerts, because I would turn the dock belt way down if I could, which is actually another reason why I love the rollover stats feature so much, because then you can see what's going on in each dock just by hovering. Okay, so the crossplay setting is a big one, and it can be kind of confusing. So there's two different settings for this, one here and one in the ranked queue, and they're weird. It's easy to misunderstand what these settings are actually doing. Turning crossplay off is going to give you poor matchmaking with longer queue times, so you'll want this on even if you're only trying to play other Xbox players. For whatever reason, the matchmaking queue is split into Xbox with crossplay on and Xbox with crossplay off. There's still just the one Xbox ladder, but if you turn off crossplay, you won't match with other controller players who have it turned on, even though you're both playing on Xbox and both playing with a controller. Weird, right? In the ranked queue screen, there's another setting for cross input, and that's what determines if you can face players on keyboard and mouse. So the best setting for new controller players is going to be crossplay on, cross input off. This will give you the largest pool of controller players to play against, giving you shorter queue times and better match quality, and you still won't be matched with keyboard and mouse, even with crossplay on. I like default aggressive stance. If you turn this off, it'll set new units to defensive when they're created. While I do use stand ground and defensive and feudal in every game, I still prefer to have this option on aggressive. For control groups, 8 is going to make them a bit easier to select since the slices are bigger, but having 12 is just more flexible. I tend to group my production buildings and also queue units into groups, so in most games I'm using a minimum of 6 control groups just to do that, having main production, trash, and castles each in a group, and then the production from each in their own, so that only leaves 2 open to do other things. For auto farm, it's really up to you. You can toggle these in-game too if you're tight on wood and just want to micro it for a little bit. Automatic placement is set in the auto eco wheel, and reseating is in the mill. Range indicators are bad for the game, and you should turn them off. I have them on show when selected, as that feels similar to clicking on a unit, but persistent range indicators are just getting too close to Spreadsheet Simulator, and I don't like how their inclusion as a setting makes players feel pressured into using them to stay competitive, even if they otherwise dislike them. I do like the resource health bars. They're unobtrusive, and they can help you know when you're going to overchop, and are also useful for timing during your Dark Age build. Object highlights can help with microing your lumberjacks or targeting specific enemies, but the effect is visually just too strong for me, so I've got it turned off. If there was some additional settings here to customize how the highlight looked, I might use this one. Select Unit Portrait is visually pretty subtle, but useful. It's that little circle beside the cursor, reminding you what you have selected. So small trees are fine. I actually do prefer the look of the standard trees, but it's just so much harder to play when you've got the big trees on, especially if you've got a southern woodline. Idle pointers look like shit, in my opinion, and I'm kind of skeptical that they're actually even a competitive advantage, as visually scanning around the screen looking for indicators manually is going to be a whole lot slower than staying on top of your idols in other ways. So navigation waypoints let you quickly snap the camera to different places around the map by holding left trigger and moving the right stick. The settings here let you customize where the game is going to automatically place those waypoints for you. For most of mine, I've got them set on player, with just castles being set to all, because Relic and Wonder Victory doesn't matter in ranked, and so many town centers are going to be built over the course of the game that it's less useful to have so many waypoints if you have this set to everyone. You can also add waypoints whenever you want in the game by clicking in your right stick while holding LT or RB. Next, we're going to look at the controller settings. I like vibration, as it provides useful feedback like warning you when you're deleting a unit. Taunt combo images are the button shortcuts that you see in place of the taunt numbers. I like using taunts, so leaving these on makes it easier to learn them, but there's no real benefit from doing this, so feel free to disable them if you find those distracting. To send taunts in-game, you hold the left trigger and press the view button. I prefer a fairly slow pan speed at just 9%. Going much faster makes it hard to select things for me, and oddly, if you set this to 0, you actually can't move. Inertia is bugged and randomly activates even when the camera isn't moving, so I have this off, even though I would prefer to use a little bit, like 2 to 3%. So I max out the marquee size and would even make it bigger if I could, to be able to quickly select groups by swiping over them. This makes it faster to garrison units in the TC, for example. The next setting affects how fast the marquee expands when you hold A. This amount, it scales relative to where you've got your size set, so while I've got mine on 60 here, if you don't like the massive 200% marquee size, then you're probably going to also want to change your speed. I really hope that they add some more detailed settings for these and for the camera in general, as far as easing dead zones and separate controls for pan and zoom. With the default minimap setting, you can move the cursor around without moving the camera. Pressing Y will snap you to it, while holding Y lets you fast pan. With the fast pan setting enabled, you can just hold RB for the minimap without having to also press Y. So minimap reticle speed changes how fast you can fast pan. I've been on 50%, but I think I'm going to try bumping this up a little bit faster. Default zoom sets your camera height at the start of the game, but the slider goes backwards. 100% zoom, to me, sounds like that should be the closest, making everything biggest on the screen all the way zoomed in. But 100% is all the way out, and 0 is all the way in. I like 74%. Maximum zoom affects how far you can zoom. It's not a huge change either way though, despite what the tooltip says. Magnetism is another area where I really wish we had some more parameters to play with. The current behavior is kinda useful, but it snaps to the wrong thing all the time. I would love if there was a modifier button that you could hold in-game to temporarily disable magnetism, as it can be really hard to select a lumber camp or repair a gate when the cursor keeps jumping to nearby units. but I do feel like it's generally helpful enough in selecting things that I keep it on. I have been gradually lowering the amount though over time. Currently, I'm down to 11%. Weird to me that small reticle is a toggle and not a slider. Loose reticle lets you move the cursor around independently from the camera, like in the PC version of the game. I've got my reticle opacity on 64%. Hold menus is faster as it eliminates the second action needed to close the menu. But I do have the B button set to just exit build mode, leaving the villager selected. I don't understand what the building placement snap is trying to accomplish, but it feels awful. And even with this turned off, building placement still snaps really awkwardly compared to what you get on the PC version. And just like hold menus, hold wall lets you eliminate taking a confirm action. You just hold, drag, and release, without needing to press the button again to build. This makes one-tile quick walling feel a lot better too. Split send is another one where I just don't get the intended effect. What this does is makes A select and X move, but X normally gives you the option to attack move, so I don't think you can do that with this setting. So I don't know why you'd ever use that. It's also bugged, so sometimes you randomly see an expanding marquee animation when you have this setting enabled. The friendly unit selected options are pretty helpful. With these set to select, you can then select other units or buildings without needing to first deselect. This can be somewhat counterintuitive in certain situations, like setting a rally point on your ally's market, but to do that, you hold LT and press X, and that'll let you set a rally point without changing your selected building. So I don't like easy select military. I'd prefer actually if this could do the opposite and make dragging over military and villagers only select the villagers. If you're on advanced UI though, you can hold B and press left on the D-pad to filter between military and economic units within your selection. Easy select villager is pretty nice though, as it'll make the selection ignore your herdables when dragging a selection under the TC. For quick find behavior, there's a couple of good options in here, but I like press to cycle single units and hold for select all globally. I prefer global over local so that it's possible to send your whole army somewhere quickly or assign all of your idols to a resource at once. You're going to want to turn off quick find snap, especially if you like monks. But even if you hate monks, this will make it easier to macro during a fight, as you can continue queuing things up without looking away. When you do want to snap to the selection, just click in your left stick. I've got my quick find villager setting set to idle, so that I can just hold up to grab all my idols at once. But for quick find military, I prefer having that one set to all. Quick find naval units lets you use the D-pad to select different types of ships. For find menu pages, you're probably going to want this one on too. One gives you a simplified menu with fewer options in it, which might be cool if you could customize it and just put your favorites on the one wheel, but oh my god, I hate how the build wheel and the find wheel aren't the same. So like, see how the market is bottom left here on the build wheel, but in the find menu, it's top right. So I end up getting confused and having trouble finding it all the time. I've got villager double press on. Since quick find is set to idle, this provides a fast way to do either action. So I can select everyone with a double click or just select the idols by holding up. Villager job roles limits double click selections to workers on the same task. I don't like this, but I can see how other players might prefer it. With flick selection enabled, you can just hold LB and move your left stick towards the group you want to select, and then let go to select it. Direct control group shortcuts are awesome though. It gives you D-pad shortcuts for managing your control groups. You can tap to select, double tap to snap, and hold to create a new group. It'd be cool though if there was a subordinate setting here to determine whether holding would merge or overwrite when you're targeting an existing group. Whew! Alright, that's all of them. Thanks for playing Menu Simulator with me today. If you've changed your settings after watching this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you think I'm a noob and my settings are trash, be sure to let me know in the comments.